Chapultepec Peace Accords. Salvadoran military government FMLN 12,000 to 15,000 Civil War aftermath. The Salvadoran Civil War was a civil war in El Salvador which was fought between the military-led junta government of El Salvador and the Farabundo Marti National Liberation Front from 15 October 1979 to 16 January 1992. A coup on October 15, 1979, was followed by killings of anti-coup protesters by the government and of anti-disorder protesters by the guerrillas, and is widely seen as the start of civil war. The fully fledged civil war lasted for more than 12 years and included the deliberate terrorizing and targeting of civilians by US-trained government death squads including prominent clergy from the Catholic Church, the recruitment of child soldiers and other human rights violations, mostly by the military. An unknown number of people disappeared while the UN reports that the war killed more than 75,000 people between 1979 and 1992. The war ended with the Chapultepec Peace Accords. But in 2016 the El Salvador Supreme Court ruled that the 1993 amnesty law was unconstitutional and that the El Salvador government could prosecute war criminals. During the Carter and Reagan administrations, the U.S. provided $1–2 million per day in economic aid to the Salvadoran government, and by 1984, $1 billion had been given. The U.S. also provided significant training and equipment to the military. The Salvadoran government was considered friendly and an ally by the U.S. in the context of the Cold War. In May 1983, it was reported that U.S. military officers were working within the Salvadoran High Command and making important decisions. Counterinsurgency tactics implemented often targeted civilians, with the United Nations estimating that the FMLN guerrillas were responsible for 5% of the acts of violence of civilians during the Civil War, while 85% were committed by the Salvadoran armed forces and death squads. In 1990 the UN began peace negotiations, and on January 16, 1992, a final agreement, the Chapultepec Peace Accords, was signed by the combatants in Mexico City, formally ending the conflict. El Salvador has historically been characterized by marked socioeconomic inequality. In the late 19th century, coffee became a major cash crop for El Salvador, bringing in about 95% of the country's income. However, this income was restricted to only 2% of the population, exacerbating a divide between a small but powerful land-owning elite and an impoverished majority. This divide grew through the 1920s and was compounded by a drop in coffee prices following the stock market crash of 1929. In 1932 the Central American Socialist Party was formed and led an uprising of peasants and indigenous people against the government. The rebellion was brutally suppressed in the 1932 Salvadoran peasant massacre. La Matanza, the slaughter in Spanish, as it came to be known, allowed a military-led government to maintain power and reinforced the animosity of many Salvadorans towards the government, military, and landed elite. That tension grew throughout the 20th century. The Farabundo Marti National Liberation Front, a leftist group that formed in the 1970s, took its name from one of the rebellion's communist leaders. On July 14, 1969, an armed conflict erupted between El Salvador and Honduras over immigration disputes caused by Honduran land reform laws. The conflict lasted only 4 days but had major long-term effects for Salvadoran society. Trade was disrupted between El Salvador and Honduras, causing tremendous economic damage to both nations. An estimated 300,000 Salvadorans were displaced due to battle, many of whom were exiled from Honduras. In many cases, the Salvadoran government could not meet their needs. The football war also strengthened the power of the military in El Salvador, leading to heightened corruption. In the years following the war, the government expanded its purchases of arms from sources such as Israel, Brazil, West Germany and the United States. The 1972 Salvadoran presidential election was marred by massive electoral fraud, which favored the military-backed National Conciliation Party also began to develop. The growth of left-wing insurgency in El Salvador occurred against a backdrop of rising food prices and decreased agricultural output exacerbated by the 1973 oil crisis. This worsened the existent socio-economic inequality in the country, leading to increased unrest. In response, President Arturo Armando Molina enacted a series of land reform measures, calling for large landholdings to be redistributed among the peasant population. The reforms failed, thanks to opposition from the landed elite, reinforcing the widespread discontent with the government. On the 20th of February 1977, the PCN defeated the National Opposing Union in the presidential elections. As was the case in 1972, the results of the 1977 election were again fraudulent and favored a military candidate, General Carlos Humberto Romero, state sponsor.